Hello, everyone. I am going to be streaming some more tonight. I am going to invite some people. Hopefully, it won't just be me rambling for for hours and hours. I think I do an okay job, to be honest, to be fair. But it does get boring, and it can become very stale. I know that. Um, this evening I will be streaming until it's 8:45. I'm probably going to be going until two in the morning. But I'm going to cut things up. So when it gets to say to 10 o'clock or just after for this little stream, I'll cut it off. Then we'll have like segments instead of just having like a 4 hour recording. Of three, I'll cut up the shorter bits, and then the main things which are addressed, I can then go back and label the live stream because people do listen to these things, whether it's just me and the nonsense I have to spew, or whether it's other people and the chemistry there. There are reasons people the one I did last night, me responding to comments and just this, nothing that interesting in my opinion, has like 400 views already. What the fuck? How does that happen? Yeah, there you go. That's okay. It's weird to me. All right, I'm gonna invite a few people. So, okay, I've invited Skeleton. I'm going to invite Ed. Although I don't know if Ed will be available. Who else could I? Oh, I'll leave that for now. Just Ed and Skeleton. If they turn up, Skeleton might, and then he might. And then if he's here, I might invite Jack. I might invite Tom Rock. So I invite Woes. I want to invite Woes, but he's probably fucking busy. I spoke to him earlier because we were going to do just so you know, this is kind of behind the scenes. Um the fourth video he's supposed to be doing about the whole alt-right thing. Uh he's going to do it after the Brexit stuff is over. Because there's been a load of stuff which has happened. So the Joe Cox murder, Orlando, and Brexit, yada yada yada. So he's going to wait until Brexit's done for him until he does the last video. After which, him and I will do have a conversation, a live stream conversation about the whole affair, which was supposed to happen like 2 weeks ago. Bless him, but crikey. But that's fine. As long as he's honest with me, of course. Let me pop out the chat. Fuck it, I will invite Woes. Live streaming. Nothing too formal. If he's available and he says yes, then it'll be the first time he's been on my channel in a while. Since last year. So yeah. And of course, anyone watching, if I know you and the rest of it, then feel free to just message me and you can join the shitposting squad. Um, good grief. There we go. Anyway, I'm still kind of getting set up, as it were, fiddling around with things here and there and all that old nonsense. Okay. Right. Okay, I'm ready. I have everything set up fairly sensibly. So yeah, like I said, we'll keep this going, me just babbling incoherently for a while. Later on, I think James will be available, hopefully. I think that's kind of at about 12, though, so 3 hours from now. I'll still be up. I don't mind. I could do this for fucking ever. Um, I just prefer to keep things obviously quality over quantity. It's difficult to do that sometimes, and I do produce a lot of content, and I do these streams a lot. I know that, but generally they are of some substance. Like last night, a lot of it was just banter and shitposting, but there were bits and pieces which were good enough and important enough for me to think might as well keep it online. Like I know I'm notorious for deleting things. If it stream goes terribly and it's just a complete waste of time, I will delete it. It's not a problem. There's there are other opportunities to do things. It's not a big deal. What I don't want to do, obviously, though, is delete things which are worth keeping. Anyway, let's have a look at some of these comments. Oh, good grief. Woodsy McCaw is just kind of. If you keep this up, I will just like. Let me just read some of his. I'll read his comments up to now. His first comment was, "Damn, I'm horny right now." Right. Uh, and then he speaks to someone else, and then he says, "Why do you always look so cute?" And then he says, "What's more degenerate, installing Windows 10 or having gay sex?" Oh, Windows 10, obviously. But honestly, dude, this isn't like the right stuff. So you're gonna stop it, or I will just filter you. To be quite honest, filter, block, whatever. You will be banned from the chat. Because I'm not a tolerant person, you see. I don't have patience, at least not, to a silly extreme. Sorzai's comments, fucking keck, I hear Babylonian in the refugees video. Yeah, the right stuffs, or Walt Bismarck, I think he's now called. Their we are refugees song. Ed was in that. Like I said yesterday, don't tell anyone. It's a secret. But yeah, it's interesting. Once you know that, you hear him. Like you just know he's there. So Tadeusz, that I can't pronounce that name. I'm not even going to try and butcher it and dishonor you or myself. How about Richard Spencer's Brexit video? I haven't seen it. Let me just check my subs feed. Are you talking about? Are you talking about the one the other day? The other week, even? I think last week. Spencer's kind of, you know, on the verge of being pro EU sort of thing. Yeah, yeah. My views on Spencer's views there are well known. There's no reason for me to badger on and on and on about it. I think Spencer totally misunderstands the European Union, although to in his defense, I know Woes did a conversation or a podcast with him, and Woes told me, and it isn't online yet, so again, spoilers, uh, that it went well. Spencer is kind of coming around to everyone else's point. Um, so that's good, I suppose. Spencer is Spencer's kind of pan white thing. Uh, I see it as very basically very naive, idealistic. A term like white only emerges with any sort of use or utility in the colonial context, in the American context. It's too wishy-washy a term to be applied to Europeans. Ethno-nationalism is the way we do things, ultimately, not racial nationalism. Um, and Richard, I think, very much underestimates just how tribal Europeans are and how many differences there are between different groups in Europe. Uh, there you go. Do you think Spencer is malevolent or smart, or just not smart? I think he is smart, and I don't think he's malevolent. I just think he's naive about this particular topic. I know, we banter a lot about Spencer being a crypto leftist. He said some silly things. I think at one point he said something like, "Oh, communism could work if it was all white people," or he said things to that effect. Um, but I think Spencer is a good guy, and he is very intelligent. As PT Carlo, glad to see you here, mate. As he says, Spencer is extremely intelligent, but he's just he doesn't quite get it. If Spencer was in Europe, if he really travelled between France, Poland, England, Norway, Spain, you know, he would. I think his views on these things would become more nuanced as Europeans' views on these things are. There are few Europeans who espouse pan-Europeanism or pan-whiteness, and for good reason. That isn't a coincidence. It's not an accident. Um, we're ethnic nationalists. If we're going to be nationalists, we aren't racial nationalists. It's too white, as it were, has very limited geopolitical implications. It's not a term you can really apply to a political context. Metapolitically, it has some utility if you look at it like that. But as for organizing a society, the real world is a bit too complex for terms as broad as that, as bland as that, as inclusive as that. Mark Citadel says Americans should not really comment on Europe. Uh, no, I think. Well, fuck me. Then, what can Europeans comment on America? If people are informed on something, they should talk about it. If they aren't, they should wait until they are informed, or inform themselves, etc. In my opinion, Spencer is a bit. He underestimates. Like I said, he underestimates the nuance of European ethno-nationalism. I think, honestly, I think that just comes through lack of first-hand experience. There have only been two forces in Europe's history which have unified Europe. The first was the Roman Empire. Uh, a hell of a lot of other peoples, and obviously constantly fought with North Europeans. And then you have Christendom in the Middle Ages, and even then, it wasn't a case of all of Europe is one thing. It had a shared cultural or shared religious identity under the church, and you see things such as the Crusades come out of that. But even then, there were the Northern Crusades against pagans. There were other like petty crusades against other Christians, which were kind of political wars. Um, there's never been a unified one state, one government, one ideology, one people Europe, and it will never be the case. It's folly. That's what the European Union wants to do, basically, but it wants to do it in a secular, kind of corporatist fashion, using the ideology of the hard left as a kind of proxy for kind of mercantilism, if you like, imposed upon all of these various states. Once you take away a supposed corporatism upon them, or mercantilism upon them, or an ideology based upon this, and there you go, cheap holidays and free movement for everyone. Doesn't really work like that. The economy of it all is fucked. As we know, South Europe is fucked. Um, we have all these countries like Germany has to bring in all this labor because no one's having fucking children. The real world is just too complicated, and individual peoples, communities, political structures are often too stubborn, and not a problem with that, but they're often too stubborn um, to be fitted under some sort of bland umbrella, as the European Union, like anything similar, like a European imperium. It's never going to happen. Trying to herd Europeans is like herding cats, because Europeans are naturally very individualistic, nationalistic, kind of tribal. We hold grudges, we remember things, and we're good at defending ourselves, uh, generally speaking. So the real world politics just doesn't accommodate that kind of vast geopolitical kind of stuff, if you see what I mean. It just doesn't accommodate it. You could impose that sort of thing upon like ant-like people like the Chinese. China is a big country. There are various parts within China. Um, the Russians, well, the Russians, but the Bolsheviks tried it with communism when they suppressed the Bulgarians, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, etc. They managed it though, but at the cost of millions of lives and the most mechanized state torture and starvation and murder, which is really quite unparalleled historically. Um, that's the sort of things you have to impose upon people if you wish to have such a mechanized kind of system. Human nature doesn't accommodate it. At least European nature doesn't accommodate it. Other races might be more predisposed, East Asians particularly, especially Chinese people, but Europeans, nah. Uh, the only times, like I said, when we've come together, it was really for religious reasons. Even the Roman Empire existed as a metaphysical idea first and foremost. Um, Pontifex Pontifex Maximus, etc. Religion is the only force which can do it because it goes beyond the temporal, it goes beyond the political, the ethnic, and so on. You have to have that structure. You can't have it secularly based upon politics or economics, even ideology, uh, without enforcing ideological purity, and that can only be achieved through mass murder. So yeah, basically that's that. And I've been rambling for a while now, so I'm gonna have to read back all these fucking comments. Good grief, I've fucking skipped a load of them. Yeah, you don't hear Ed. I don't know. I don't know where Ed is. I have messaged him. I gave him a link to the conversation. He isn't here. If it's just me again, then sorry. Does anyone actually care about Mr. Spencer? yes, people should care about Richard. He's an important dude, and he does a lot of important and good things. Really, um, Radix is an important website. It's well known, but he's not right on everything. There are a few people who aren't right on everything. Um, that's that's fine though. That's not a problem. That's one of the best things about our community is that because of the internet, because it's based on the internet, you can correct people, and they can hear you and hear you out, and you can have a conversation, and it's like no worries. It's it's not a big deal. If people are wrong, then they can be corrected, and it's like you move on. Good grief, this camera. I don't know why I have to keep doing this. Yeah, as Mark Citadel says, Ramsey Paul went to Romania and they had no idea what he was talking about when he said white. Yeah, indeed. These sorts of metapolitically applied terms, which Americans tend to use more than anyone else, or colonials, um, man, not everyone is like that. Not everyone thinks in the same way. Um, okay, I'm gonna have to read a few comments now because I've been rambling for fucking ages. And by the way, Mark, if you want to finally participate, let me know. I don't know if you're free, if you're still with your little hiatus. Adam, what do you think about the far-right Brexit bigot killing Joe Cox? I'm really tempted to say it was a false flag, or there was something shifty going on. Like, mm, I didn't think at first that it was. I thought it was just a. I think it is a lone man, but still. But the kind of when he said, "What did he?" For independence and all the rest of it, like fucking hell, like this couldn't have been timed better. So I'm part of me thinks it isn't an accident. Part of me thinks it's kind of oh, I don't know. I don't want to get too like tinfoily, but I don't feel good about it. I don't. It's not giving me good vibes. If you know what I mean. Um, yeah, Bizarrius corrects me. Not all Europeans are individualistic. British are much better at it than Ukrainians. Yeah, yeah. You know what I mean? I'm being general. West Europeans, Europeans generally, we are more prone to individualistic philosophies than the Chinese are. For example, even Ukrainians. Um, yeah, compared to me, to a Briton, an Englishman, a Ukrainian is sort of collectivist. Um, high trust, low trust, all these things, they differ within the white race, as it were. There is huge diversity. Yeah, I'm not saying all Europeans are the same. Don't get me wrong. Straight question for Adam from PC Carlo. How deeply have you read Spengler? Not very deeply. How do you compare his ideas to Evola's? As far as I know of Spengler's ideas, which isn't, like I said, very deeply, I have yet to read the downfall of the Occident, as it's properly called. Um, obviously, Spengler is he's not a transcendentalist in the way Evola is, right? So he doesn't see Kali Yuga, he doesn't see ambiguous forces, a term Evola like to throw around. He doesn't see these things like that. He sees these things as being organismic, as being organic, natural, chthonic, and so on. His understanding of civilization starts from the ground up. Although he then does see a metaphysic imbued in the culture, Magian, Faustian, etc. These are traits which are metaphysics. They go beyond the blood and soil, but they resonate from it, I think, is Spengler's view. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where for Evola, blood and soil comes from metaphysics, not the other way around, if you want to put it crudely. Yeah, I know I need to read Decline of the West. I know I have so much stuff to fucking read. Like, I just don't have. I don't have the. I'm reading too much as it is. Like I was saying yesterday, my backlog is massive. Adam, who do you think will be the next Tory leader? Oh, I don't know. I don't want to say Osborne. I don't pay much attention to party politics, um, really. But if it's someone like Rees-Mogg or Hannon or someone with actually kind of a pair of bollocks, I think that would be sensible. Uh, I don't know though. Adam, would you feel guilty to marry a Polish girl? I wouldn't marry a Polish girl. She should marry a Polish man, and I will marry an English woman. PT Carla says, interesting, I've ironically never read Evola, and everyone talks about him. I know he had some issues with Spengler. Yeah, Evola was a critic of everyone, even Nietzsche. But Evola's main criticism of these right-wing kind of sorts of people who everyone else loves, and Evola really did admire them, but his critique was that they lacked a transcendental element. They lacked a reference point which resided in the absolute, in the divine, in God, or Godhead, or Brahma, whatever. So that was basically his own criticism. Um, I can't remember where he mentions Spengler. It must have been in an article or an essay somewhere. I think I read a quote or something. He speaks about Nietzsche in Ride the Tiger. He criticizes the Übermensch. Um, Evola's absolute individual, which, to give you the TLDR, is um, the man who can fully realize kind of his own I, and I mean that as in a letter I, not the not the I, but can say a resounding yes to his person in like in the highest sense. Again, this is explained in Ride the Tiger. Um, but the man who can say a complete and absolute yes to what he is fundamentally. This is a man which goes beyond the Übermensch. Again, Ride the Tiger, this is all explained um, in here. So there you go. Adam, what do you think of an Anglosphere? What do you mean, the Anglosphere? So Britain, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand. Well, it's remnants of the colonies, isn't it? P.T. Carlos says about Evola, his esotericism is extremely perennialist. Yes, Evola is considered a perennialist in the line of Guénon, Schuon, Eliade, Kumaraswamy, and so on. Although a lot of esotericists don't like him because he was involved in politics. Um, it's distasteful to like a lot of people who admire Schuon because Evola was involved in fascism to a degree, National Socialism to a degree. He wasn't just a kind of hoity-toity intellectual thinker. He was also a doer. His domain was action, and that's kind of looked down upon in some spheres. Plenty of people aren't that immature, but some people I think are a bit dismissive. He was just one of these, you know, just nasty little fascists who are trying to appropriate our spirituality. You get especially at New Age spheres, you get people like that. They should all be slapped in the face. Um, But yeah, Evola is a perennialist. Bizarriest asks, why would it be wrong for you to marry a Polish woman? Because I'm not Polish. We have different cultures. We come out of a different tradition. Um, so it's like you could ask me the same about why would it be wrong for me to marry a Somalian? It's wrong for the same reasons. Adam, would you consider growing a beard? Yeah, I suppose, but I'm 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 still a babby. So I do, but nothing here yet, really. Give it 5 years when I'm in my 20s. Uh, is it just as wrong to marry a Polish girl for a Brit as it is for a Brit to marry an Arab? No, it's not as bad or as wrong or as in. It isn't as much of an imbalance, but it's still. I don't see how this would come about. What's the likelihood of it? You know, a Polish woman will speak Polish, be of that tradition, of that cultural trajectory, of that mentality, of that spirit, and I'm all that of the English, separated by thousands of miles. It's not going to happen. Is there such thing as an anarcho-Evolian? No. Evolian thinking is aristocratic. It is authoritarian. It is an anarchic. It's deeply individualistic, but only because it's extremely hierarchical, in so much as of the Kshatriya caste, the warrior caste, the regal caste, in some respects, the domain of action, and any freedom which is present in Evola's philosophy is spiritual liberation, nothing to do with civic or political rights or freedoms, Evola's Men Amid the Ruins explains his political views, I suppose. His only like proper political work, he did do Fascism Viewed from the Right and Notes on the Third Reich, which were originally essays, but he turned them into a little book. Um, but generally, this is considered the kind of contextualization of what's established in Revolt Against the Modern World. So, okay, you have tradition with a capital T. What does it look like? And this is the basic. This is the book which basically explains that question. Um, Let me see if I can read a little excerpt from this. Where should we go to? Yeah, good grief. The first 90 pages of this book is an essay, which is published on West Coast Radio. I posted it there for people to read. It's an essay. It's titled "Julius Evola's Political Endeavors." It's by Dr. H.T. Hansen. I would recommend people read it. It's very interesting. But let me just skip to page 105, where the book actually starts. So let me just get 105. Right, yeah. So that is just this essay. I think it's like 40,000 words, at least. I'm not going to read the preface. Good grief. Nor the introduction. I've read a little bit before. He starts off this book by quoting Plato. from the Republic. Let me just read this little quote here. Perhaps there is a pattern of it laid up in heaven for him who wishes to pre-contemplate it, and in doing so make himself its citizen. It makes no difference whether it exists now or ever will exist. The politics of this city alone will be his and none other. So immediately we're going back to kind of imperial ideals and the idea of the transcendental society governed by God, not by man. Um, yeah, that's tradition for you. This is why I would say National Socialism is humanist and anthropocentric, because they are not a god. It's inherently left wing. It's inherently revolutionary. Not to say there's, it's a lot better than liberalism, but it isn't, like I said yesterday, it's not extreme enough. It still exists within Kali Yuga. It still exists within degeneracy, technically. Where should I read? Let me go through, skim through some of this. It's difficult to find like just a paragraph to quote because Evola explains things at length and uses 10 different examples and allegories in order to make a single point. So I don't want to read like 1,000 words just for a little quote for people's curiosity. Okay, here we are. This is an important one. This is a very important point. So what is needed is not to artificially and coercively perpetuate particular forms tied to the past, despite having exhausted their vital possibilities and being out of touch with the times. For the authentic revolutionary conservative, what really counts is to be faithful not to past forms and institutions, but rather to principles, of which such forms and institutions have been particular expressions, adequate for a specific period of time and in a specific geographical area. And just as these particular expressions ought to be regarded as changeable and ephemeral in themselves, since they are connected to historical circumstances that are often unrepeatable, likewise the corresponding principles animating them have a value that is unaffected by such contingencies, as they enjoy a perennial actuality. New forms corresponding in essence to the old ones are liable to emerge from them as if from a seed. Thus, even as they eventually replace the old forms, even in a revolutionary manner, what remains is a certain continuity amid the changing historical, social, economic, and cultural factors. So he's basically saying that for any genuine change to come about, any actual challenge to liberalism, as it were, you have to go back to the past, and instead of repeating, feudal monarchism as it was practiced in 1284 or something, you have to go back to the core ideas and principles which underlie that system and recontextualize them for the modern circumstance. Technology, economy, and so on. Social technology is a huge part of our predicament now, and it's why you wouldn't be able to institute a kind of feudalism now, just because of the spread of information. So if you have any genuine resistance to the modern world in any political form, it would be futile to try and replicate something from the past, but you'd have to rather go back to the metaphysics of the metaphysics which animated particular traditional ordered forms of civilization and cut modernity to fit them, if you see what I mean. So that's a very important point, and a lot of people misunderstand that. Or they miss it. They jump over it. They sidestep it. Their gaze averts to it. So like Nazism, neo-Nazism is very silly because that was a particular ideology which was fit to cut a particular time. And if you're going to, it's why fascism is more flexible, because you can have different variations. whereas German National Socialism is very specific to a certain period of time. But that's just getting into meta politics. Just shit posting. Good grief. Adam, don't you think some Evola sites and fans seem sort of cult-like towards Evola and act as though he's some kind of superhero, kind of? Yeah, you get that with all sorts of people, dude. Mate, you get people who are actual Hitlerians who obsess over Uncle Adolf. A lot of people look to Evola because Evola is the only one of the only well-known and active individuals in the past 100 years who has opposed liberalism fundamentally, and who was very active in so much as writing and so on and so forth. We and his work is here for us. So if there were like five other people doing exactly the same thing to the same extent, and how to Evola, as Evola, sorry, those who are like as prolific regarding like writing shit tons of books, articles, and so on, then it wouldn't just be Evola. But it's because it is just Evola who was kind of in that vein of traditionalism as well as involvements in politics and sort of those sorts of things. People look to him as a sort of archetype, and he is. People look to him as a model sort of thing. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I do think it can cloud some people's judgment because Evola is not perfect. Um, did Adam's house suddenly move to the East Coast? Mate, I'm in England. I'm not in America. It's 9:30 here in summer, so it's still light. It'll be dark in half an hour. Right, let me have a look down here. What's the subject matter of his other two main books? Oh man, I feel I hate repeating myself. I really get sick of it. But okay, this is revolving into the modern world. All right, its main point is to establish what tradition is. Right, there you go. Lemon Amid the Ruins establishes how tradition could be contextualized now, as in post World War II, or what steps would society have to undertake in order to reincorporate tradition um, in a proper sense, not just a kind of vague mockery. And finally, you have Ride the Tiger, which is kind of, but that isn't going to happen. It's a kind of, tradition. It'd be nice, but it isn't going to happen in our lifetime. So what do we do as individuals? Evola's response is exactly that: to ride the tiger of modernity, which is an old Chinese saying, where you have something bad, i.e., the modern world, and instead of letting it consume you, you jump atop it and you conquer it in a sense while it's still active. So you go with the flow in a way, but you're still triumphant. And that's what it outlines in Ride the Tiger. So it makes sense. That's why I recommend people read it chronologically, because it establishes your thesis, hypothesis, and then synthesis. Let me have a look here. Let me go down. Okay, there's a good point. I'm just trying to keep up with the chat. Good grief. Can you give an example of a principle of traditional civilizations? What its institutions were and what institutions are needed today to enforce that principle? Let's think something really easy. Ruled by God, Deus Vult. That's the role of the monarch, right? To be the mediator between heaven and earth, to be Pontifex Maximus, builder of bridges between the earthly and the divine. This is contextualized in all monarchy. That's the point. Utilitarian arguments aside from monarchy, many of which you can make, you know, trained representative from birth who is self-invested to maintain his kingdom or empire or whatever for because that's his role. That's why he exists. That's his to do a good job. Those sorts of arguments aside, the king is seen traditionally as the link between man and the god, or gods even. And this is manifest. This idea is manifest not only in Pontifex Maximus, but also in the Germanic kingdoms, where another kind of pagan systems where a king was seen to be born of the gods. Anglo-Saxons, Hengist and Horsa were allegedly descended from Odin, or Wotan as it's properly pronounced. And they reigned until, well, after Alfred the Great, until what's his face at Hastings. I can't remember. You know, so you have the idea of a king who has a divine origin or a divine role. You know, and it's manifest in different forms in different civilizations. There's only so much I can explain briefly. A lot of this stuff people need to just read for themselves. Oh yes, fuck YouTube mentions Phalanx, which is a thing Richard Spencer's doing. I don't know anything about it. There is already an organization called Phalanx in England, I think, or in Britain. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know. Spencer's only flaw is that he believes in a new Roman Empire. No, he doesn't. Uh, the Roman Empire wasn't a racial empire. And especially if you consider the fact that Richard's understanding of race is totally biological. So, yeah. Good grief. Does Evola support joining a living tradition like Gaon? Yes, where applicable, where possible. Ultimately, however, Evola is more. He's less. He's less competitive than Gaon. He's much more about action and initiation and the individual and power. Almost in a Nietzschean way, there are parallels, you could say. Whereas Genon is different. Which book is my favorite? Of Evola's three, I don't have a favorite. It's like they're not. Evola is exposing ideas. It isn't entertainment. What is whiteness at its greatest extent? An illusion. It doesn't exist, mate. It's a vague metapolitical term which is which can be applied to colonials and European peoples to some extent, but not totally. There is no such thing as white culture or white language, you know. There is English, there is Spanish, there is German, Swedish, but white is no. If the principles are perennial, then doesn't that mean the institutions must also be perennial, like the monarchy you describe? No. The institutions have to embody perennial principles, but their manifestation doesn't have to be identical. Otherwise, the Roman Empire would have been identical to the early Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, but it wasn't. The light is going all over the place. What's going on there? Weird. But no, so you can have the same idea manifest differently. Same reason you have Chinese traditionalism, Persian traditionalism, Byzantine traditionalism, Roman traditionalism. It's all tradition, but manifest differently for different time periods, different races, and so on. This is explained in Ganon's East and West. It's explained in Revolt Against the Modern World, and so on and so on and so on. And will you be voting in the referendum? No. Another straight question. You mentioned God. This is from PT Carlo. How do you see Christianity's role going forward with the right? Do you think a revival of it is essential to save the West? Yes. Um, but the thing is, there was discussion in the Reactors for a while back, and it's still kind of ongoing, regarding the role of the church. The church doesn't do anything, and this is a point. It isn't the church's responsibility to do anything. It's men's responsibility. It's your responsibility. It's mine. It's our fathers, and so on. The church will become corrupted when the men in the church become corrupted, and that's exactly what's happened. It's not that doctrine has changed, but interpretation has changed. Attitudes have changed. Christianity is the religion of the Knights Templar, the Iron Guard, and so on. So is it the religion of contemporary nonsense. Uh, it's just men have changed. Men have deteriorated. Their inner form has gone downwards, in a way. But yeah, it will have to. There cannot be a secular revolution against secularism. Secularism is a big part of our problem. It's an indicator of what's going wrong. And the answer to it isn't more secularism. It won't work. So yes, it will involve God. Mystical monk. So if there is no whiteness, and you affirm that the existence of individual Europeans and a broader European identity, do you lean towards one or the other regarding individual European nations and broader European identity? Um, when I say whiteness is an illusion, I don't mean that in its harshest extent. I can see where the term can be used, and I understand why people use it. Um, but it's not something which can be tightly defined. European is also a tricky one. But I lean more towards the existence of individual nations with shared traditions, and as you extend outwards, the propensity of traditions which are shared between individual nations and groups, they decrease in frequency as you move eastwards and southwards, of course, through the Mediterranean into Africa. But I mean, these sorts of questions don't even need to be asked. If I'm loyal to my family and you're loyal to your family, these things sort themselves out. I've made this point many times. If individuals are morally upright and don't betray their families, and everyone, right? If fathers raise their children properly, if sons are obedient, and so on, the race thing sorts itself out. The only reason we have to consider these things, however, is because people aren't morally upright. They are degenerate, they are weak, they are promiscuous, they are liberal. Why won't you vote in the ERF? Because I don't believe in democracy. Would you subscribe to the idea of divine right of kings? Yes, but that divine kind of sanction can deteriorate depending upon the actions of the king. It's something which has some degree of flexibility to it, depending upon the king. And of course, the age, Kali Yuga. These things have to be considered. Would you say all Europeans fit broadly into similar cultures? Yeah, there are parallels you could draw. You know, compared to a Somalian, a Spaniard is very similar to a Swede. But if you just take the Spaniard and the Swede by themselves, they're very different. Again, it's about perspective. If you zoom in, there are big differences. But if you zoom out, yeah, you can well enough define what is European, what is white. But that sort of categorization only really works at that broader level. It kind of falls apart as soon as you zoom in, and try and analyze white Swedes and white Spaniards and white Ukrainians. Um, the term white then loses its meaning. It's not a term which can be broadly used or applied, and it loses its meaning at certain levels. And that's where my criticism of it and where other people's criticisms of the term lie. Not in the fact that it can be applied from a metapolitical perspective to a degree. It of course can. That's why it exists in the first place. People like Richard aren't idiots. Richard Spencer, they're not stupid people. But it's about perspective. If you lean towards the idea of nation, how does that relate to the Evolian idea of race? Do you see nations as unique races? To an extent, you could say that. An Englishman is distinct from a Frenchman. In our spirit, we are different representations of different destinies. That's why we are different. That's how you can differentiate us. It isn't just because of biology, and some slight genetic variations, and it's because of other things and what informs our culture, language, our histories, and how things are manifested there. These are our myths and so on. Just as the Romans saw themselves as a different race to the Greeks and to the Gauls and to the Germans and to the Huns, but that wasn't just dependent upon biology and because they have slightly different skin tone. It rested upon other things. Mark, who is in the fucking chat right now, wrote a very good piece for Social Matter some time ago about the Evolian idea of the tripartite race. Where this is all explained. I've also mentioned it a few times. Evola's synthesis of a doctrine of race. I don't think it's been translated. I think parts of it have been translated by Collegero Salvo of Gornahor.net and are at gornahor.wordpress.com. I think you can find parts there, like individual chapters. But again, these sorts of ideas, I am not the best explainer. So definitely go to these things yourself. I like to see myself as a kind of conduit for these other things which I find and like to show to people and explain to some degree. But ultimately, people need to go to themselves and make up their own mind because plenty of people are more intelligent than I am and can articulate these things far more thoroughly, and so forth. Anders Beringer, tribe would be close to it then. Yeah, tribe, feed, these words all are quite interesting and important. And yeah, feed particularly. is a very good word because it's multidimensional. Race in the modern context is an extremely two-dimensional word. It's a very horizontal word. It means biology, doesn't it? Um, it has other implications which come later in the mind of the person using the term, but by itself it implies not a lot, and that is insufficient ultimately, because it's more about yes, I am of a race, but what does that mean? How is that contextualized? How is that realized, actualized? You know? And these are the sorts of things in Evolian understanding of race, which is three-dimensional, it's vertical in its orientation. Those are the sorts of things that definition of race considers and answers, which is why it's a superior term, and that's why I use it. And that's how I understand these things, because it encompasses the whole question rather completely, instead of leaving important parts of it kind of sawn off with a kind of modern materialistic silliness, which does the sawing. There's your answer. Where can I find James' articles? Oh, if you go to my website, go to atcwallace.com, go to the links section. His website is Casual Histrionics, canonized with a Z, because it uses the American spelling, .wordpress.com. That's James's blog. Would you bend the knee and swear allegiance to a self-proclaimed King Trump? No. He's a Vaishya. He isn't a Kshatriya or Brahmin, or above that still. He's a Vaishya. And he wouldn't do it anyway. He would more declare himself. He's more likely to declare himself a fascist. So he wouldn't, but he won't be calling himself, he won't be declaring himself Pontifex anytime soon, will he? What are your thoughts on Joe Owens? Nothing against Joe Owens. I don't want to instigate something, honestly. Joe's a good guy. His heart's in the right place. A lot of his criticisms, and there are a lot of criticisms. No, I think there are too many criticisms. A lot of them are quite valid. But I do think he should be doing something more constructive than just kind of criticizing people. And some of the people he's called out, fair enough, right? Jackson, for example, shifty as fuck. Britain first, to a degree. I'm not so sold. But then other people, like Red Ice Radio, um, Angelo John Gage, it's just he doesn't understand the alt right, like Red Ice, like Angelo, like Countercurrents. He doesn't get it, what this community is. Um, doesn't Evola believe in an imperial order rather than the liberal construct of the nation state? Absolutely. The latest translation of his upper countercurrent seems to suggest that he takes whiteness as something foundational. I would need to read it. In my understanding of Evola, whiteness is a non-existent concept, at least taken in its modern form, in its modern meaning, a la white nationalism. It doesn't exist with Evola. He would look to Aryanness, which is a metaphysical idea, which is found manifest in India, for fuck's sake. uh, of course, Evola was a Sicilian. He was European, so he will be looking at the whole thing from that lens. And there will be those parallels and those sorts of implications to his writing. They are for a European audience, if you like. But there is no kind of biologically reductionist concept of race or whiteness with Evola at all. In fact, he would reject that very strongly. I think he even criticizes that in his Fascism Viewed from the Right and Notes on the Third Reich, as well as in various other places. In fact, even in one of the early chapters of Revolts Against the Modern World, he mentions this and criticizes this idea. So there you go. Adam, what is your honest opinion on AIDS Skrillex? And Carl the Cock, I suppose, as well. Into the pit they go. It's where they belong, in the pit. To use I'm stealing Jack's imperial aspiration. His he likes to use the pit. That's where they belong. So you can credit him. Go and subscribe to him. Um, if he appears later, that would be nice. I would like to have him on the podcast, on the little hangout. I'm going to wrap this little segment up in about 10 minutes, guys, right? Could someone, because I can't fucking remember for the life of me, please just give me like 2 words in the chat which would clarify the content of this hangout as it was, and don't fucking shitpost because you will go in the pit with the rest of them, and by that I mean you'll be filtered. I want just because I can't fucking remember. We spoke about Evola, we spoke about Spencer, we spoke about race. What should we call it? Whiteness. It'll be the 18/06/16 hangout colon whiteness, and you got to pick 2 words which describe what we've spoken about. Race and tradition, is that vague enough? Adrian Stan. Is the pit code word for your bed? No, it's not. It's code word for a very deep hole in the ground where we throw degenerates. Shitposting / Evola. Hold on, Putin's gay son. This is an interesting name there, mate. So you're saying it's a social construct. What is? I don't know if you're talking to me actually. If it's defined by anything else other than biology. Evola wasn't a materialist. He wouldn't believe in biology. Well, he would, see it as a science, more or less. But his worldview is defined by metaphysics. And that isn't to say social construct. That's a blasphemy almost. But no, it's a metaphysical idea. This is Evola explains all this himself. Why are you coming to me for it? I know I'm a fucking white male. I'm sorry. Just stop it with the bullying, all right? I'll just call this hangout. What should we call it? Oh man. It'll be 18/06/16 hangout part 1. Whiteness and Evola. There we go. That'll do. Whiteness and Evola. With that, I think, because there are no questions, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to have a 10-minute break, and then I'll be right back with part 2, and we'll fucking see what happens. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in like 5-10 minutes.